Namaskar. In this wonderful series of magnificent Savitri, we come across many gems that Savitri offers, and it's indeed a joy to unfold, unravel those beautiful gems, those beautiful aspects of Savitri. One of them, which has been extremely fascinating to all of us, has been the dialogue with death. The topic that I have chosen today is the debate of Savitri and death. I have not concentrated on the debate of love and death as was used by Sri Aurobindo to name the canto, for the reasons that this paper will unfold. Primarily in this discussion, I would concentrate on the dialogues, the arguments, the philosophies, the concepts put forth by death before Savitri in order to dissuade her from taking Satyavan back to earth or asking Satyavan alive back on earth. Also, it is interesting that these arguments are very acceptable, very relatable to most of the human beings, because we have seen it, heard it, read about it, or even sometimes experienced it. Any one of these concepts or dialogues that death presents, we feel that we can relate to it. That makes it extremely interesting. And Savitri, she speaks wherever it is required, but she does not give a rebuttal to death on his own level. As we go along, we will discuss and decipher these different levels and meanings of philosophies and concepts and Savitri's response to death. Now, the concept of death has been extremely intriguing, interesting, and fascinating of the topics that has been dealt by philosophers, in spiritual literature, and in other literatures across the world, in all cultures. Even the scientists have been thinking about or talking about what is death, and they have sometimes very simple definition that the moment this physical body, the organs fail, the physical body diseases or it stops functioning, that is what they call death, the physical death. However, philosophers would not perhaps accept or they would not perhaps be happy with this simple definition, because death entails a lot, the pain and suffering of those who have been left behind, the pain and suffering that the person who dies, who goes through, and the entire phenomena, the death itself. So there have been debates, treatises, philosophies, arguments put forth by many a philosopher in India as well as in Western philosophy. To name them, Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, Heidegger, Levinas, all these have literally dealt with the idea of what is death, what is life, and have given their own understanding of these ideas. In India also, we have these dialogues going on very openly, and one of the very highlighting example is the example of Nachiketas taken from Kathopanishad, where he directly combats death and asks him who he is. So death definitely makes a very, very fascinating study and a very involving, a very terrifying one, if I were to say. Now, Sri Aurobindo does mention, when he writes Savitri, that he did explore a lot of different themes, a lot of legends from across different literatures, and he found, the legend of Ruru and Priyamvada, or Puravaras and Urvashi, or Nala Damayanti, or many different Indian and Western stories, where he says every time death is triumphant, every time life has to be sacrificed. He was not happy with this theme, and that is why we are told, and Sri Aurobindo mentions it clearly, that Savitri Satyavan legend, as narrated in Mahabharata, is the only one which satisfied his quest and this idea of conquerance of love over death, and not death over life or love. So that is where we see Sri Aurobindo was very clear in when he chose this legend of Savitri and Satyavan. So how does Sri Aurobindo deal with this topic in Savitri? Of course, many people will come up with many different ideas and perspectives on this. As we mentioned, the idea for this study is to only see the philosophies put forth by death. Death personified as in Savitri. So here we know the storyline is that it is in about book 10 that Satyavan is dead, is lying on the lap of Savitri, and there the dark shadow, death, appears, and he is now taking away Satyavan's soul to the netherworlds. Savitri, with her strength and strength of tapasya, she starts going behind death and Satyavan, which is perhaps possible for those who have attained some kind of a siddhi. Because for a normal human being, it is not possible. We see the person lying dead in front of us and we do not know what is happening to his soul or what is going to happen after he leaves this body. But here was Savitri, who had already done so much of tapasya that she could, with her powers, follow Satyavan's soul and death, and could see it going away. That is one of the highlights. I feel that it's a wonderful vision, it's a wonderful faculty that was given to Savitri, or she had achieved through her tapasya. Now the first argument that comes in book 9, even before the book 10 starts, is where the arguments by death begin. And the first one he puts forth is that of the rudimentary religionist. That means he represents the mind of such a humanity which is God-fearing, which worships a power unknown to them, which has magnified or has created something called God out of fear and reverence, or only because he can please a certain power so that they are not harmed, they are not killed by these powers. And we know that in the ancient times, most of the religions were based on fear and desire of getting saved from any wrath of nature or God. So death says that human beings are such a God-fearing people. They fear anything that is unknown to them. They have no power. They have literally, they are like animals on earth. They have no special advantage or anything. And yet, what the mind of man is doing since aeons, it's not just the rudimentary religion that began in ancient times, but even today, for us, sometimes when we are extremely God-fearing, when we are extremely frightened with what is unknown, what we do is our minds are like hunters upon tracks unknown. So we keep thinking, we keep going into those tracks which we do not know. Where do we go? What do we do? Whom do we approach? We are not aware of that. And in fact, death mentions that you human beings, out of your fear, have created something called God. So he says, he refutes that there is anything called God. It is only the fear of human beings that has given birth to something called God. And what does this God do? He deepens with thought the mystery of his fate and turns to song his laughter and his tears. His mortality vexing with the immortal's dreams, troubling his transience with the infinite's breath, they gave him hungers which no food can fill. He is the cattle of the shepherd gods. So a very beautiful description of our state of being, where we have this longing for immortality, we have this longing for the infinite. We have been given this longing by these, so to say, gods. And what they have done is they have given us the hunger towards something higher, towards something beautiful, towards something sublime, but that we never get the satisfaction of finding it because we have not yet found it. And it, perhaps according to death, it cannot be found. So this is the first argument that he puts forth, that there is no God. God is a magnified human being, a magnified power whom human beings worship. And he has in turn, this power has perhaps endowed humanity with a certain hopes and aspirations, false hopes and aspirations, behind which we keep on running. He also mentions that human beings have no aim. The birth of human being have no aim. Aimless man toils in an uncertain world. So that is where he declares that human beings have no aim. They just come like animals. They live on earth and they die. So there is nothing big about human beings being born on earth. And so he says, Savitri, do not fuss around so much to take back Satyavan. He is of your consequence. You are going to meet the same consequence as Satyavan and everybody else on earth, because this is the fate, because he is here for some time to live and then to die. However, Savitri says, conscious of immortality, I walk. Of course, there are other dialogues, but we are focusing mainly on what death is putting forth. So I will be speaking a little about what Savitri has spoken. Otherwise, the scope of the paper will become very large. So Savitri's dialogues or her responses would be more in a limited fashion. So, conscious of immortality, I walk. Now we have seen that Savitri has this quality to walk behind Death and Satyavan in the netherworlds. She has started the walk. Now we come to know that Savitri she is conscious of her immortality. She is conscious that she is an amsha, is a portion of the divine sent here. And so she declares to Death that I am conscious of my immortality. Now the second argument, because Death is right now thinking that she is a mortal being with some siddhis, with some faculties which have opened in her. And so if I kind of dissuade her, she will finally go back. So the second argument that he puts forth is that death is the creator of this world. Now this is a very strange argument in terms of philosophies, or maybe kind of a very, I wouldn't call it negative, but still a philosophy which is very frightening. So we come to know that Death says that I made the worlds my net, each joy a mesh, a hunger amorous of its suffering prey, life that devours, my image see in things. So essentially what Death means is that all your life revolves around me. I am for me, you are moving ahead only to die. And to our surprise, a few philosophers, especially the Western, they have endorsed this idea. And even in India, we have certain customs endorsing this. I'll read out a line by a research scholar who mentions Socrates, and he says, the true philosopher cannot be afraid of death, as his whole life indeed is a practice and a preparation for it. So Socrates had declared something to this effect before he died, and it is quoted by Nikos Kokosalakis in one of his papers. So we see this theory, this concept, or this stance, this experience of this Greek philosopher Socrates. Another great philosopher from Germany, Heidegger, he also mentions death is something distinctively impending. So of course, we are also aware of this fact that we accept somewhere that yes, we have to die someday. Death is going to happen. It is an inevitable phenomenon. And so in India, we perform a lot of rituals, ceremonies, a lot of customs, so that our passing away is easier, our passing afterlife is an easier journey. We have this concept of afterlife, and other cultures too have it. So in order to make our journey after death easier, we perform quite a few rituals, do charity, take the blessings of people, so that our journey onwards becomes easier. Or even after people pass away, we perform certain rites and rituals so that their journey is a smoother one. So definitely we see that there is an influence of death, the fear of death, the consequences during or after death that we are afraid of. Now what does Savitri say here? She comes out with almost a scorn and declares here that who is this God imagined by thy night, contemptuously creating worlds disdained, who made for vanity the brilliant stars? So essentially, when death declares that I am the God who has created this world, I am the one who has created the suffering or the life or the aimless life of these people, it is an extremely audacious stance that is taken by death. So Savitri chides him, Savitri scorns him, and he says it's only your imagination. Who is this God imagined by thy night? That is the question she asks. So, and she declares, she knows who this real God is. And the real God, she says, is, my God is will and triumphs in his path. My God is love and sweetly suffers. So these two images of God we get in Savitri here, that God is fear, night, death, and God is beautiful, sweet, love, all-embracing, and he suffers for the human being and does not make him suffer. So we see the two differences between what death is inflicting human beings with and what the real God is giving human beings. So these are the two differences that we see in the approach of death and Savitri. Now we move on to the next viewpoint as to there's a dialogue between what is life on earth given by death and what life is or would be as given by Savitri. So I will read out a small passage and then we will discuss certain beautiful literary nuances in this before we move on. Death declares, I only am eternal and endure. I only am eternal and endure. I am the shapeless, formidable vast. I am the emptiness that men call space. I am a timeless nothingness carrying all. I am the illimitable, the mute alone. I, death, am he, there is no other God. I have made man her instrument and slave. His body I made my banquet, his life my food. Man has no other help but only death. He comes to me at his end for rest and peace. I, death, am the one refuge of thy soul. Further, I am the immobile in which all things move. I am the nude inane in which they cease. I have no body and no tongue to speak. I commune not with human eye and ear. Only my thought gave a figure to my void. Only thy thought gave a figure to my void. Now, when we read these lines, they resonate with what we read in Book 1, Canto 4, where we see Ashwapati's journey had begun, and we read the words that are uttered by death are almost a resonance of what we read in this Book 1, Canto 4. I read a few lines from Book 1, Canto 4. The Absolute, the Perfect, the Alone, has called out of the silence his mute force. where she lay in the featureless and formless hush, guarding from time by her immobile sleep the ineffable puissance of his solitude. And we know the lines go on, the absolute, the perfect, the alone, etc. But what is remarkable here is that death also uses these terms like illimitable, mute alone, vast, formidable, all these terms which are used by the superconscious, when in the previous canto where Sri Aurobindo speaks about what this world is made up of. It is made up of this absolute, the perfect, the alone. He is the one who has become this world. And so death uses the same terms, and he says, I have become, or I have made this world, that I alone exist, that the absolute, the perfect, the alone. And here also death says, I alone am. So it is, perhaps Sri Aurobindo has used these words, or these words have come more to show that was the superconscious truth and this is the inconscient truth. Somewhere there's a whole positivity, there's a whole huge big world, a truth about that Satchidananda, the way the world was formed. And there is something that this audacious, this egoistic, this dark shadow thinks that he's the illimitable, he's the mute alone, he alone is. And to a certain extent, for us human beings who have not realized the divine, who do not know that there is an absolute and there is a perfect and there is a Satchidananda or Brahman, we see the death stares in our eyes. He is alone there staring at us as the only reality of life. So to some extent, it does resonate with what we experience in daily life. So at the same time, these two descriptions of the superconscious infinite and this the darkness about which the realm of death, or what death is that he speaks about, they resonate because Sri Aurobindo in this same canto, I think book 9 or book 10, he mentions the inconscient is the superconscious sleep. This he mentions in book 10, canto 1. The inconscient is the superconscious sleep. So obviously, if the inconscious is illimitable, mute, alone, perfect, absolute, so of course death does not use the word perfect here, but he uses all other words: illimitable, alone, I, death, am he, and there is no other God. So the absoluteness above is there, the absoluteness below. That perhaps is the link between these two descriptions of the inconscient and the superconscious status of being. Now next, he also says, in fact, that death is the one refuge of our souls. This is again very true. In this, when he says what is life and how is life related to death, death is that refuge of our souls. Because when we grow old, when we have a terminal illness, when we have so much of suffering in our life, we get into situations which are unsurpassable, unsurmountable. We choose death. Either we call for it, we want it, or whichever the means, but at least our wish is that we should die. And it's one refuge that our souls have. The suffering, we get away from suffering, we get over from suffering because there is death. Had there been no death, we would have been constantly suffering in the same body, with the same mind, with the same problems in life. So death knows about this, and that's why very proudly he says, the one refuge of your soul, he says, he tells Savitri that I am that refuge, and therefore and thereby Satyavan has found that refuge. The whole idea is that this arguments are being presented for Satyavan. So Satyavan has found refuge, and so do not deny him that refuge. Let him be in the arms of death and be restful, be away from this hustle and bustle and problems and challenges of life. He is resting in peace wherever he is in the arms of death. However, with all these 2 or 3 arguments given by death till now, Savitri, of course, is not convinced, and she responds, "O death, who reasonest, I reason not. Reason that scans and breaks, but cannot build, or builds in vain because she doubts her work. I am, I love, I see, I act, I will." So that is the stature of Savitri. She is not reasoning. Death is trying to reason out. Death is telling Savitri that life is not good, therefore death is good. Life is transient, and therefore death is the only solution. Your gods are not listening to you, and therefore I am the God who is the only one listening to you. So these are the reasons that death is putting forth in front of Savitri. But Savitri says, "I do not reason." Because reason breaks. It always sees either or. It sees death, but it is not able to see the larger life. It is able to see the suffering, but it does not see why we are suffering. So it does not have the integral vision. And therefore she says, "I am, I love, I see, I act, I will." Of course, we will not go into details of this line from Savitri, what Savitri has uttered, because perhaps this itself can become a topic of study as to why Savitri says all this and what does it mean. So she persists in her march, in her longing, in her insistence to get back Satyavan, and she moves on. Now, after this, they come to a certain point. They are moving, they are constantly moving, and Satyavan is there first, then death, and then Savitri. They move into a world which looks very beautiful, which apparently is very sublime, an absolutely idealistic and utopian world. So, death says, no, all this world is a chimera. It's a it's a magic. It's not there. It doesn't exist. So do not be allured by the fact that there is something like an ideal. In fact, he says, the ideal never yet was real made. Earth only is there and not some heavenly source. So this is perhaps again a different kind of a philosophy where we say that heavens exist and we have to go to the heaven, or we have to bring down the heavens. So there is an ideal world that we have created in our minds possibly, that everything in the heavens is beautiful, is calm, is harmonious, is perfect, is its forms are perfect, everything. But he says it's only in your mind, it's only in your thought. And this is what also the mother has endorsed, mother has explained, that human beings have created something called heaven or paradise, which actually did not exist. But in our mental consciousness, we have created a place, we have given it a form, we have thought about it so much that there has come into existence a world where we feel we can escape and it will be most beautiful to be there. It's a perfect world away from this suffering earth. So that death says is a chimera. It doesn't exist in actuality. And there, in this ideal world, you think love is going to be eternal, love is going to be most beautiful, and love is something that you can get fulfilled. So the love which is incomplete on earth will be fulfilled in this ideal air or in this ideal world. So he breaks this kind of a balloon or the bubble that has been created in the name of idealism or ideal world, and says that in thee alone there is no room for love. In vain to clothe love's perishable mud, thou hast woven on immortal's borrowed loom the ideal's gorgeous and unfading roe. The ideal never yet was made real. The ideal never yet was real made. Now, the ideal in which we think that love is going to be fulfilled was never made real. And here another idea that comes forth, death speaks of, is the avatars have lived and died in vain. Vain was the sage's thought, the prophet's voice. In vain is seen the shining upward way. Earth lies unchanged beneath the circling sun. Here we see the reason put forth by Death. Death is still reasoning. Death is still showing Savitri what is Earth all about and why she should not choose to be on Earth or choose to bring back Satyavan on Earth. So and we are aware of this, that it is partly true. We know that human beings have been the same since the primitive times. We do the same hunting, same agriculture, only our ways have been refined a little, but our angers, desires, passions, emotions, nothing has changed. And Death mentions that the avatars have lived and died in vain. So we are aware since the beginning of this creation, many an avatar have come on earth to perhaps affect a change. But apparently when we see, I make this word consciously, I make this remark consciously, apparently we feel that there is no change on earth. And Death is right in that. Apparently there is no change. We've little bit refined ourselves over the years, but there is no change. However, Mother and Sri-Aurobindo would tell us that this apparent no change has prepared the earth over the millenniums. Because of the coming of sages and saints, the earth is now ready to receive a higher force which can bring about an irrevocable change. So the earth needed to be made ready. Earth was not ready earlier to receive a force to make a permanent change on earth. So now, of course, Death is either oblivious of it or does not want to acknowledge it, but what he is speaking is also partly true. He says that yes, humanity has not changed. Our fears are the same, our relation with God has been the same, so nothing has much changed in our lives. And for those who wanted to literally overrule this reign of death, have happily chosen to walk the path of moksha or nirvana or salvation and have left the earth. Nevertheless, Death triumphs in this when he says that yes, there also they had to leave the body. We can't say that these people who attained nirvana went ahead with their own bodies. There may be one or two instances like that, but most of them had to leave their body, shed their body on earth and go in the search of nirvana. Or after receiving God, after they got nirvana, they left the body. So this is the reason again put forth by Death, where he says that life on earth is futile. Another very interesting argument that he puts forth is about the nature of love, the nature of human beings, and then Savitri's response to the kind of love that she represents. Now, why should this have come? I was wondering, why should this argument, when everything was going on the life plane or on the mental plane or existential plane, why did Death bring forth this question of love? Perhaps for the reason that's, or Sri Aurobindo brought this, perhaps for the reason that Savitri represents love. Savitri is divine love. She has brought divine love to earth from that Supreme. And also that it is love because of which Death thinks that Savitri wants Satyavan back. And therefore it is required for a human being, according to Death, to know that love is of no consequence. Love is just, as he says, a yearning of thy flesh. So love is not something sublime that we think of. And so he kind of brings sense to Savitri, or brings sense to us to understand what love is. A few lines we will read. It is a conscious yearning of thy soul. It is a glorious burning of thy nerves. A rose of dream splendor petaling thy mind. A great red rapture and torture of thy heart. A sudden transfiguration of thy days. It passes and the world is as before. It's very beautiful. On a human level, if we see what love is, it is definitely something that impacts our life, our physical body, our mental consciousness, our vital consciousness, and it just does bring a lot of change in our life, positive or negative, but it does bring, in fact mostly positive. We feel that we have elevated in love, but he says it passes and the world is as before. Now this is something very interesting, that love, this kind of a love, he says, passes on and we remain the same, the world remains the same, the person lives or dies, we remain the same, life goes on. Further down these lines he says, if Satyavan had lived, love would have died. But Satyavan is dead and love shall live a little while in thy sad breast, until his face and body fade on memory's wall, where other bodies, other faces come. Again, this is the truth of our lives, because we know that when a person dies, mostly, especially like Satyavan and Savitri, they had a very short conjugal life. And he says that, you see, the fact that Satyavan is dead, at least you have that love saved in your heart. You have that love for him for a little while, till you find somebody else in your life who will be more charming, who will be more valuable in your life. So you will definitely forget Satyavan at that time. So the love that you're thinking is the love I have for my husband, for my partner, is transient. You will yourself forget it very soon, he says. And we know that this happens in lives today, when we see it does happen. So this time Savitri does not completely negate his sentence. In fact, Savitri has not by far till now negated his sentence word by word. She has taken him a step forward always in her arguments. But here she mentions, thy falsehoods mingled with sad strains of truth. So she acknowledges that what death is saying to a certain extent is sad, is true, but it is mixed with sadness. It came to me from God to God. So what we have seen is that death is uttering a few sentences which are true, certain statements which are true. But what Savitri says is, that love about which you're talking about is a human love, is an earthly love, and it has some truth of its transience there. But my love, Savitri's love, came to me from God. To God it returns. So here again we see that she has taken a step above what she is speaking about, a step beyond what death is presenting her. So therefore, these formulas, arguments, theories about love are not applicable to Savitri. For she says, my love is not the hunger for the heart. My love is not the craving of the flesh. So that is where Savitri stands, and her consciousness is beyond mundane human love. Up till now, we see a beautiful transition of the questions that death has put forth and Savitri has responded. And he has mostly spoken of the philosophies of life, or what is life, what is love, what is the rudimentary mind which is fearful of God and religion, what does it speak about? How is it that God alone is the sole death alone is the sole God? Moving forward, we come to very interesting dialogues now, where we see that death puts forth certain philosophies which we have developed as philosophies in front. One of them is the philosophy where the materialist denies the existence of anything that is not material, or anything that they can't see. They claim that it is all unreal, or it's a fascination, or it's a fallacy. So this is the point of view of the materialist, the sovereignty of matter, which death puts forth. He speaks, a solid image of reality carved out of being to prop the works of time, matter on the firm earth sits, strong and sure, it is the firstborn of created things. If matter fails, all crumbling cracks and falls, all upon matter stands as on a rock. So again, why does he bring this argument? I read further and then we will discuss. I formed earth's beauty out of atom and gas and built from chemic plasm the living man. A transient breath thou takest for thy soul, born from a gas, a plasm, a sperm, a gene, a magnified image of man's mind for God, a shadow of thyself thrown upon space. So why is Death putting forth this philosophy? Essentially because, again, he's bringing back the idea that what you are thinking is love, what you're thinking is ideal, what you're thinking is something beautiful, is all made out of matter. And to matter it returns. In fact, he says at one point that everything is made out of matter and to matter it returns. Everything is made out of death and to death it returns. So, this is what a materialist, a material scientist very much believes in, that our emotions, our angers, our jealousies are all a combination of some chemicals. And so he tells Savitri that when this is such a transient thing, when matter is the ultimate, then where is this love? What is all this argument about retrieving Satyavan back and his matter being something so eloquent, or there is a soul that you want to take back? Where all this comes from? Because there is nothing like God or love or ideal that is there. This argument gets completed further, but before that there is an we'll take the next argument where Death says, now he changes his stand and says that even matter vanishes into energy's wake. So the philosophy of the materialist, now this is the quantum physicist who says that matter is not what it looks like. Matter is always in flux, and it is energy which has formed matter. It has energy which is moving everything. And so, even matter vanishes into energy's wake. And energy is a motion of old naught. So, Death agrees to this. And he says, you see, even matter that we think is the final, the grand finale, the last born or the first born of, not the last, I'm sorry, the first born of the creation, as Death mentions, is also transitory. There is something called energy, which is a very vague thing that we don't understand what energy is. So, that is all is formed out of energy. The ideal is a malady of thy mind, a bright delirium of thy speech and thought, a strange wine of beauty lifting thee to false sight. A noble fiction of thy yearnings made, thy human imperfection it must share. Its form and nature disappoint the heart, and never shall it find its heavenly shape, and never can it be fulfilled in time. So, it's not possible to pin down any kind of matter on earth or any kind of energy on earth, and so everything is in a flux, everything is transient. So, where is your existence on earth by itself? It is a matter of forces. That is what the argument is put forth by Death. Of course, before Savitri refutes this, there is one more argument, then we will move to what Savitri has to say. In between now, Death brings the idea of what an atheist would think about. Atheist, of course, is not fully denying that matter is the be all and end all, but he is not even convinced 100% that matter is the be all and end all. Atheist usually does not believe in God, the existence of a God or a superpower which would have created this universe, but he is also not 100% convinced necessarily about matter being the last word. And in this, when Death is explaining what is the nature of matter, what is the nature of truth, of knowledge about which usually all philosophies, usually the wise people speak of, he's perhaps, to my understanding, referring to the Vedic prayer, Asatoma Sadgamaya, Tamasoma Jyotirgamaya, Mrityorma Amritam Gamaya. And in the dialogues that spoken by Death, we will see how these come up. Interposed between the upper and nether void, thy consciousness reflects the world around. In the distorting mirror of ignorance, or upward turns to catch imagined stars. Or if half-truth is playing with the earth, throwing its light on a dark, shadowy ground, it touches only and leaves a luminous smudge. Immortality thou claimest for thy spirit, but immortality for imperfect man. A God who hurts himself at every step would be a cycle of eternal pain. Wisdom and love thou claimest as thy right, but knowledge in this world is error's mate, a brilliant procuress of nations, and human love a posturer on earth's stage, who imitates with verve a fairy dance. So we would mark here certain words like truth, light, immortality, knowledge. And of course these resonate with the Vedic prayer as well as with the four first powers about which the mother speaks who came down on earth: truth, life, love and light, which came and then became their opposites and rule the world today. So what Death is referring to perhaps here is that we are being governed by falsehoods. If there are truths, they are half-truths which always have a shadow of falsehood. If there is life, it is always shadowed by death. If there is love, it is always combined with a lot of tension of give and take or hatred. And of course, light is always accompanied with darkness. So nothing is pure as we think. So the atheist kind of is telling us that you are thinking of a God, you are thinking of this earth, but all these are mingled truths, mingled light, unclear light and all. So this is where we get the arguments. So we had the argument of the materialist, the quantum physicist, the atheist. And then he says further, a very beautiful sentence, he says that you people, you human beings have made your mind, your mind is such a trick, it's a charlatan, he says, it's a glorious charlatan, where he can trick you into certain arguments, into believing something, into creating something in your mind where you intend to believe that yes, this heaven exists, yes, the God exists, yes, there is an ideal which can be brought down on earth, yes, the heaven can come down on earth. So these are all tricks that the mind plays with us. So Death asks her, are you sure you want to, cow down to this kind of a trickster mind? But Savitri responds, O Death, thou speakest truth, but truth that slays. I answer to thee with the truth that saves. So again we see here an advance in the arguments that Savitri is, this time she does not say that your truths are mingled with falsehood or they are all false or negative or anything. She says thou speakest truth, but truth that slays. So if anybody were to tell us that our world is so materialist, is devoid of God, is only an energy play and it has no direction, aimless, we would feel dejected. And that's why she says truth that slays. But now Savitri answers him with the truth that saves. Again, we are not going into those details of what Savitri says, because she does mention about the higher life. She mentions about the higher consciousness, which is the whole aim of this creation is to bring down that higher consciousness, that heaven on earth, and establish it on this very earth and energy. She also speaks about how this energy itself, how this matter itself is the chariot of God. So these are the arguments put forth by Savitri. Not arguments, I'm sorry, these are the responses, these are the truth spoken about by Savitri. Now another very interesting philosophy and a dilemma put forth by Death is the dichotomy of matter and spirit. But this happens only after, for the first time, in fact, after Savitri says that yes, death has spoken the truth, but at one point she says, one day humanity will trample thee down to reach the immortal heights. Now, in all these dialogues, when she speaks of this, it is almost like death is he becomes restless. He perhaps, he's not able to accept that death is a law established on the earth since time immemorial, since the time creation came into existence. And how is it that somebody can come and trample this very law of nature? However, before he takes up this, the dichotomy of matter and spirit, I will read out the lines and they are quite self-explanatory. Where matter is, there spirit is a dream. If all are the spirit, matter is a lie. And who was the liar who forged the universe? The real and the unreal cannot mate. He who would turn to God must leave the world. He who would live in spirit must give up life. He who has met the self renounces self. Further, sages exploring the world oceans vast have found extinction the soul harbor safe. Two only are the doors of man's escape: death of his body, matter's gate to peace; death of his soul, his last felicity. So the dichotomy is brought out very well. I need not elaborate much on it. We know the reference to the real and the unreal is to Sri Shankaracharya perhaps, where he says that Brahman alone is real and this world is a mithya, this world is unreal. And the idea of extinction, which refers to perhaps Buddhism, where they believe that one has to go out of this cycle of life and death in order to be away from pain and suffering or get rid of the pain and suffering. So very, very, very true to experience of all the spiritual, perhaps many of the spiritual leaders who have gone through this, spiritual sadhaks who have gone through this. He who would turn to God must leave the world, because it's very difficult to be in the world and to be with the God. That is, we have seen with a lot of saints and sages. They become sages after they leave their grihast life, after they leave their parents or their regular job or responsibilities. So these worldly responsibilities, they bog down a sadhak from going towards God. Or alternatively, one who is entirely in the material consciousness and has an inner longing to go and rise above a certain level of consciousness always finds it difficult, because the responsibilities are such that he cannot balance between the spirit and his inner quest for a higher life. And so we see this beautiful philosophy, and Sri Aurobindo has used such beautiful words to convey such a deep, deep philosophy. Aeons of practices he has just spilled over into these few lines. And yet we see that despite this, now Savitri says that I do not believe in this moksha and mukti. I am not convinced about these arguments that you are giving me death. And so give me back Satyavan, my Lord, because I know what is our rule, what is our role here being assigned to us on earth. And therefore I am not deterred, or I am not dissuaded by your arguments. One of the last philosophies, the mental philosophies, we have been seeing all these have been the mental philosophies. So one of the last mental philosophies that presents in front of Savitri is that I think, therefore I am. And we are very much aware that this is a statement given by the French philosopher Descartes, where he says that because we think we exist, if we do not think that we exist, we will cease to exist. And so death also tells Savitri that now your mind is everything. Up till now he was telling us that matter was everything. And so he voiced the materialistic philosophy. Now he is saying that mind is everything. So you see the changing stances of Death as well as the kind of maneuvers he is making so that Savitri is dissuaded. So he says, you human beings, for you mind is be all and end all. And that is the adamance of mind, that is the supremacy of mind that we think on earth, that mind cannot be superseded, that mind can achieve everything. So he says, in an immutable orders hierarchy, where nature changes not, man cannot change. Ever he obeys her fixed mutations law, in a new version of her oft-told tale, in ever-wheeling cycles turns the race, his mind is pent in circling boundaries, for mind is man, beyond thought he cannot soar. So mind is man, and that's the philosophy about which we spoke. Now he also discusses in great detail about the inventions of mind and the great disasters that mind has brought and can bring upon earth. And a beautiful, marvelous sentence from Sri Aurobindo, the work of centuries vanishing in an hour. We have seen this, we see this almost every day happening. The works of centuries are brought down by a single bombing, by a single shelling. It's brought down and it vanishes into dust. So this is the mind's doing. This is what our disastrous minds can do. And then, like the French philosopher Death declares, mind is the author, spectator, actor, stage. Mind only is, and what it thinks is seen. And so Savitri renounced the hope of truth. Because mind is there, it is playing these tricks with you. Don't think that you can bring anything on this earth, because mind is playing all tricks with you. So do not cow down to this mind. Do not play to the tune of what mind is telling. Or if you think that mind is the be all and end all, then that's it. Just create a beautiful world in your mind and do not have to think or do not have to do anything. In fact, he dissuades her, he tells her, think not to plant on earth the living truth, or make of matter's world the home of God. Truth comes not there, but only the thought of truth. God is not there, but only the name of God. So these are some of the ideas that Death says that, see, this is the role of the mind, this is the reign of the mind, and so do not try to bring down heaven on earth. Do not try to talk about God, which does not exist, or which is only a name given to some power by the mind. So do not, or mind is a very limited being. Mind is what it has done. So he also says that if you want, because Savitri, because she has traveled with Death to a very, very far region, and so now Death, maybe he has some inkling of Savitri's stature. So he says, for thou must die to thyself to reach God's height. Not on earth can you find this kind of a solace. So you have to die to yourself to reach God's height. And also, Savitri responds very beautifully, where she denies that this world is made up of mind and there is no possibility of heaven on earth. She says, the soul is a figure of the unmanifest. The mind labors to think the unthinkable. The life to call the immortal into birth. The body to enshrine the illimitable. The world is not cut off from truth and God. So this was Savitri's declaration. Now the arguments, the mental arguments given by Death are more or less over. But he is still perplexed at what Savitri is, at what stature Savitri has. And he challenges her one last time that no matter how big a goddess are you, no matter how great a goddess are you, you cannot change the nature's law. And nature's law here is that is death. Since the beginning of this creation, death has ruled the earth. That is an established law, and do not try to break it. And if you have the strength to break it, then show me your face. Tell me who you are, so that I can feel convinced that you are that goddess who can bring out this change, who can bring forth this change. Then will I give to thee thy Satyavan. So now death demands from Savitri that you have traveled with me so far, you have refuted all my arguments, or you have taken them further in a certain way, but still, can you convince me that you are not that, you are that God who can effect a change? Only then will I give you Satyavan. His words, however mighty, whatever thy secret name, uttered in hidden conclaves of the gods, thy heart's ephemeral passion cannot break the iron rampart of accomplished things with which the great gods fence their camp in space. Whoever thou art behind thy human mask, even if thou art the mother of the worlds and peggest thy claim upon the realms of chance, the cosmic law is greater than thy will. Even God himself obeys the laws he made. The law abides and never can it change. The person is a bubble on time's sea. If you can see this, this is exactly the opposite of what Savitri speaks about herself when she declares to her father that, Father, once I choose and choose not again, about how her will is greater than the laws made by life or death. We shall not go into that. But then death says that if you show me who you are, I will give you Satyavan back. Now, she explains to death who he is. This is a very, very interesting turning point now. All this while, Savitri kept on speaking about what is life, what is matter, what is the creation all about, what is the direction creation is going. But now she speaks to death about who he is. And she says, O death, thou too art God, and yet not he. So, a beautiful revelation to us given by Savitri. But one last time, death urges. Of course, death is not giving a rebuttal this time, but now he is kind of urging. He is not being intolerant, irritated about Savitri's arguments or her responses. But one last time he pleads with Savitri and says, O human claimant to immortality, reveal thy power, lay bare thy spirit's force, then will I give back to thee Satyavan. Or if the mighty mother is with thee, show me her face, that I may worship her. Let deathless eyes look into the eyes of death, an imperishable force touching brute things, transform earth's death into immortal life. Then can thy dead return to thee and live. The prostrate earth perhaps shall lift her gaze and feel near her the secret body of God, and love and joy overtake fleeing time. So if we can say that death is kind of convinced about Savitri's stature, but he wants a last confirmation that if you are a human claimant to immortality, then please reveal yourself to me and look into the eyes of death. Let deathless eyes look into the eyes of death so that he can also worship this goddess, this supreme claimant, this supreme immortal being. And of course, after this, Savitri does not say anything until the mighty transformation comes. And so a mighty transformation came on her. In a flaming moment of apocalypse, the incarnation thrust aside its veil. So all this while, Savitri was not showing her divine effulgence. She maintained the stance of a human, mortal being. And so death was perhaps puzzled. He was not convinced. But now he is fully convinced. And in fact, he is engulfed in the light of Savitri, which is the transformation that comes upon death. And we will not go into those details. So now to summarize our study, we have explored how and in how many ways death has tried to dissuade Savitri from taking back Satyavan. He has spoken many a time about the transience of love, of life, of matter, of energy, of God, of mind. Everything is transient here, which is partly true. We agree that it is whatever Death has said is partly true, but then Savitri is no normal human being. She is an incarnation, and she has the knowledge of the way the world has come into being. She has seen it. So her arguments are definitely different. And so on our level they are all right, but on Savitri's level she transcends them all. When Death speaks of mundane life, Savitri speaks of divine life. When Death declares human love to be fragile, momentary and impermanent, she speaks of divine love, which is alight in all hearts but is veiled. When he declares that death and darkness are the builders of this universe, she refuses and says light and delight are the makers of this world, and the world is moved by them. When Death shows the dwarfness of mind and its limited working, Savitri reveals the potential of the higher realms of consciousness and their influence upon earth. So we see that these are the different arguments, these are the different points that have been put forth by Death and Savitri. Now, I do not call it a debate or a tarka in that sense, because what Savitri speaks is not from the mental consciousness. The dialogues given by Death, the perspective given by Death is from a mental perspective, is from an earthly perspective. Whereas what Savitri speaks about is from a very, very comprehensive, a very integral, a very inclusive level of consciousness, where she is not refuting what Death is saying entirely. She is kind of transcending that, sublimating it, subsuming it every time, and then she speaks about it to Death. This is little similar, if we can draw a parallel with Sri Krishna's dialogue with Arjuna, where Arjuna asks a question on a certain mental level, and Sri Krishna always takes him one step ahead, giving him a larger view, a larger perspective, a more comprehensive point of view. Similarly, here Savitri also gives a comprehensive perspective. In Gita, when we see that there is a psychology and philosophy of life that is given, we come to know of a lot of riddles of rebirth, karma, nature of soul. Quite a few confusions are sorted out. Similarly, in these few cantos, almost 6 cantos also that we see spread across 2 books, we realize that Death and Savitri help us get clarity on concepts like birth, the condition of man, his future, the nature of creation, the purpose and direction of creation, etc. So these are very pertinent questions that trouble us on a day-to-day level, and so reading these cantos have been extremely rewarding for this study. Most importantly, the Vedic prayer, Mrityor Ma Amritam Gamaya, the quest for immortality, which resounded on earth since aeons, is finally complete. The promise is fulfilled. Death is transformed, and the sunlit path to the divine life has been laid on the occult plane. We wait its manifestation on earth. Thank you.